Passion, purpose, possibilities. They're all right there. But sometimes we need a little push. And that's where SheSez comes in. Think of it as a master class taught by the world's most interesting women, sharing stories and ideas, because girlfriends help each other. This is SheSez with Linda Grasso. Hello and welcome to SheSez. Our guest today is Deborah Keane, founder and CEO of California Caviar, the first woman-owned and operated caviar company in the world. Deborah is also an innovator. When wild sturgeon was deemed a threatened species and imports of caviar got banned, she started farming the fish. Today, all of the caviar that California Caviar produces is from sustainable sources. It's been an amazing journey for a woman who started out her career as a nurse.
Yes.
My goodness. So and I want to point out to our listeners and our viewers that we're not drinking champagne during taping, SheSez, is not a smart thing for me to do. But Deborah so graciously brought some caviar, and a little bit into the podcast, we're going to have her talk about how you do bumps off your hand.
It's all research.
It's all research. It's all research. Bumps off your hand.
Champagne.
Sounds a little bit like the 80s.
Yes.
I think, didn't people do that with
little
cocaine?
healthier.
But whatever, a little healthier. So today, California Caviar is a multi-million-dollar business, and clients include some of the country's most elite chefs, some of whom you've worked with, five-star restaurants, gourmet stores. I want to go way in the opposite direction of this magnificent, innovative company and talk about the fact that you wanted to be a nurse. Let's talk about your journey. How long did the nursing career last?
Yeah, I was an 80s girl, and back then nurse practitioners were new and hot, and we could do more, and why be a doctor? Be a nurse practitioner, and it was that type of thing. So I went into nursing for that reason way back in the 80s. And then life just kind of pulled me in a different direction. But I started as a terminal oncology nurse, ended up my nursing career as a neonatal intensive care nurse. And now I guess I'm still somewhat in the egg business.
Yeah, I think that is so funny. That is such a funny common denominator there.
Who knows eggs better than women,
and you're
right?
doing aquatic farming of
Right.
sturgeon, so that's a little scientific.
Right.
How many years did you spend in nursing?
So I spent about 4 years in the nursing.
Wow, that's a lot of training and not a terribly long time. What
No,
was it
it
that
just
made you want to get out?
Well, you know what? While I was in school, like many people, had multiple jobs. And one of the jobs that I had while I was in school, I was actually modeling, and they decided to keep me behind the camera rather than in front of the camera after a while. So I ended up getting a job as an associate publisher of a fashion magazine in the East Coast because I had known all these stores, and I had worked with everybody from Chanel, Louis Vuitton, and all of these luxury goods. So I fell into that, and then from that, I had a passion for publishing for years, and I was in the publishing business.
Back when publishing was good.
When it was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, whenever you're with the press, you had the front row of everything, you know.
And you got into producing high-end books for hotels. You know, when you go into the hotel room and there's a gorgeous book about the resort.
I went from Playbill to the luxury goods, doing custom books for the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carlton.
And ultimately, you wound up in Paris. And why I bring that up, and I remember you telling me about this on the phone when we spoke, is that you were in Paris and you were working for this high-end publishing company.
Right.
And this is kind of interesting because I think this in some ways led you to where you are now. You started developing relationships with makers of high-end luxury goods and five-star restaurants and hotels and chefs. And I mean, there's some brand alignment when you talk about where you are now.
So the luxury good market was something I was very familiar with. And then spending time in Paris and with a lot of high-end couture designers and tour companies and a few private chefs, was able to kind of pull it all together for me.
But still, you weren't at that point thinking, oh, wow, I want to get into the high-end luxury gourmet good business. I believe it happened when you were reaching for a crab leg at a dinner and you bumped hands with someone else who wanted the same leg.
I did. I was at Michael Tilson Thomas's house, who's the director of the symphony in San Francisco. And I was reaching for a crab leg and started arm wrestling over it with somebody. And from that moment on, they had just started to was one of the investors of one of the first farms in the U.S. to produce caviar, or raise sturgeon for that matter. And that was back in 2004. And in 2004, there were 6 farms around the world raising sturgeon, only 2 farms attempting to make caviar from that.
Now, this was before the ban, though. They
Correct.
started banning catching wild sturgeon in the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And so what were these farms, what was causing them to want to do aquatic farming at that point? Because you could still import caviar.
Right. And I think it had to do with mostly the studies of the endangered species and knowing that
they were headed that way,
already threatened, and it was an effort to try to save them from becoming endangered. But because of the demand and the request and the allure of caviar, they continued to catch the wild sturgeon to the point it became on the endangered species list.
So you guys are at this dinner, you're chatting, and you become fascinated by this discussion about farming caviar. And I can't remember, did you go into business with that particular person, or did you did?
Yeah, they courted me for a little while, but I had been at a really good place at this publishing company for over 13 years at this point. I had
hard for you. Was it hard for you to do that?
Yeah,
I mean, because that's a big question mark.
I was a regional vice president. I could come and go as I pleased. I had a really good position, so it was a really hard shift. And they couldn't afford me. But I always knew that, if you do what you love, everything falls into place. And I was fascinated, so I did a lot of homework and found out what they were doing. And I was really intrigued by the fact that it had never been done before. And then they were doing something with an endangered species that had been, around for 200 million years. They're from the Jurassic era. And it was just fascinating to me. And I loved the science of, pioneering something that's never been done before.
So I'm thinking, as you're telling me all this, that there's something about you that you like newness and you like challenges. Seems like, to me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would maybe bored a little bit of the publishing thing.
Yeah, totally. Because once you've been there, done that, you're like, okay, I've got this locked in. And I really think it's so funny that you mentioned it, because I really think this is the first time I think, what do I love? And I just love, after all these years, I love the challenge of perfecting the art of caviar production and how to get the perfect egg from a wild species. And you can't control Mother Nature. And so it's never the same, and you have to adjust. And I really find that fascinating, the chemistry and the science of it.
What about the financial instability of starting something new? And you weren't 20 at that point. I think you were in your 30s, right?
Right.
What, or early 40s? What sort of made you willing to take the chance? I mean, you could have fallen.
Good point. Good question. That's a really good question. I think that a lot of my career has been a little bit of free falling. Just kind of that, we go from nursing, floated to publishing, falling into caviar. And I don't really think of the downside. I just think of the challenge and the excitement of it all. Then when you step back, you go, what was I thinking? Why would anybody do what I'm doing? It just has so many regulations. I'm dealing with a raw seafood endangered species.
Yeah.
It's like dealing in edible elephant tusks. Like, it's just impossible. The licensing, the number of certificates you need to do what I'm doing is really a challenge.
Was there any practicality in your head guiding you at all in terms of thinking, well, I do know like lots of high-end gourmet stores in Paris, and I certainly know this place in New York, or I could get it in Dean and DeLuca here. I mean, was there any of that, or no, you were just being ruled by your gut or directed by your gut?
You know what? I was definitely ruled by my gut. I was totally controlled by my gut. And I also knew I can do this. I get this part. And I always found that if you do what you love and you do it well, everything falls into place. And the hardest part was the business side of it. And all my men and my male advisors are saying, do not get a VC, do not get a partner, do not just do it yourself. It's tough, but do it yourself. And all the women, we all want to partner together, we want to work together, and you're afraid to do it on your own.
Oh, that's 100%.
But I listened to my advisors. Unfortunately, my motto is think like a man, act like a woman. I'm sorry, but it is. In business, think like a man, act like a woman. Just 2 points, yes, no, and then just make sure that you keep that feminine edge in business. And because I'm in a male-dominated business, it's I've done really well because of it. And I'm thankful that I did not bring in a partner. I've never had a partner, never had an investor.
Male or woman?
Nope,
Male
had
or
no
female?
partners, no investors, nothing. No
So the person that you knocked hands with over the crab leg, you ended up going into business with that person, and then there was a point where you said, there was some different things going on with that relationship, and you said, I want to do something on my own. So you say, I want to have my own aquatic sturgeon farm, and I want to start doing this on my own. Where did you get the startup money? Had you saved money from all the years in publishing? Did you have stock options? I mean, how did that come together?
That's great. So I'm from the East Coast, very Boston. Basically, when you have your money, you buy your car. You don't lease it And so I really believe in that. So I actually, got the call. I was talking to Jacques Pepin, and we were creating a new product at the
famous
time.
chef, French chef.
And he's saying, what are you going to do, and who are you going to work with? I said, I don't know. I think I'm unemployable. I don't think I listen very well. And he agreed with me. He knew that I wasn't the best listener. And I just started from having clients who called me, and I never had any startup money. I just simply had partnerships that were willing to work with me and clients first. So I always had sales before I had a business. Never wrote a business plan, just started selling caviar from people who trusted me. And I just grew the business as a business could sustain itself. I never went in over my head. I never went too far. And I just did kind of that old-fashioned way, because I started in 2007 and then everything crashed in 2008. So I had no place to go but up, right? So my timing was horrible, but I took the right approach. I just grew as a company.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you specifically saying when we first talked on the phone that you're not a natural salesperson.
No, I used to be the kid when I was, with the Girl Scouts or school and collect for UNICEF. They would go to the house that had no lights and no car in the driveway, no lights on, no car in the driveway. So I could go back to my mother and say, no, I did. I went to 2 houses and nobody was home, because I was so shy
funny.
and I was so afraid to ask for money. I'm a nurse. I want to give. I don't want to
Yeah.
take, and so.
So how did you turn that around?
I think it's the Blarney in me. I'm all Irish, so I think I always had the gift of gab, and I really believe in what I do. So for me, if I believe in what I am selling, and it's working, it's helping somebody, it's not sales to me. It's just me. It's my passion, and I stand behind everything I do.
So what was the first point when you knew you had something? So you take the risk, you start, developing your fish farm, and you're, learning about the business. Obviously you had to get some biology people in there who knew what they were doing and could.
I never pretend to know anything.
Get asked a lot of questions.
I surround myself with brilliant people who do what they do well.
Actually, you surrounded yourself with brilliant women. I think all of your employees are women except for one.
I have my token male. I love them.
Now, why is that? Why did you opt to hire women? Because it's such a male-dominated industry?
I think it's time. You know what I mean? I think it's time, and I think it's time that we all learn to work together and help each other, and not compete. We all start rowing in the same direction. I think that's really critical. There's some amazing women out there doing neat things, and it just kind of happened serendipitously. It just kind of morphed, and it wasn't a strategy. I expected to happen, but it just who knows eggs better than women, and it just gravitates great. It's a good
You've got
fit.
a lot of great lines. What was the point that you knew that you were going to be successful? There had to be some stressful months, perhaps years starting up. You started this in 2007, so 11 years ago. What did you get a certain account? Were you covered in Wall Street Journal's off-duty section? I mean, what was it that you?
That's a great question. So there's a couple. One early on is when I got a phone call from every major caviar company in the U.S. when I ended up leaving the original company I was with. And they all wanted me to work with them. And I said, that's interesting. And then I had one gentleman, he was Russian. He said, Deborah, they need you more than you need them. Do your business plan and I will help you. He's like, you don't need them. You're the person who's kind of changed the look and the image of caviar. You were changing the old world tradition. That's what my C's stand for. I'm taking the old world tradition and the mystique of caviar and connecting it to that sustainability and the innovation of what's happening now in the caviar business. So for me to pull it together and got all those calls, and then followed by Jacques Pepin's call, I knew that I was onto something. Then the next time I knew that basically oh my goodness, I've arrived kind of moment was when, out of the clear blue, when you get those Google alerts, Amanda Hesser from the New York Times, food, you know who Amanda Hesser is, and all of a sudden we get this alert, and it was her recipe redo in the Sunday magazine, and there's a full page article on a potato latke or Bellini she had done, and our caviar, and said for a good, sustainable source, California Caviar Company. Which is like, yes. And we had no idea that she had ordered our caviar. She had done our research, because I was the only truly sustainable caviar company in the U.S. For many, many years. And little did I know that in 2007, when I only sourced all farmed caviar, that by 2011, all wild caviar would become illegal. So I had only been taking farmed caviar while many species of caviar was still legal as wild. But I just set that standard for myself. So I had done it 4 years before every company around the world has become sustainable.
So look, your timing was impeccable when you
got lucky.
You got lucky, and we talk
Luck
about
has a lot to do with it.
We talk about that a lot on SheSez. Timing is really important. I think your timing's really kind of cool now too, because, you know, one of the sort of sales lines or little catchy things, you know, in reading about you and that you see in print, you see in all your printed materials when it says it is a woman owned and operated and one of the only or the first.
Right.
It's a good time to be the queen of caviar.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, it is. And you know what's interesting? They listen now. And they didn't listen before. And they're listening now. Now, I don't know if it takes 10 years to get there. As long as you get there. You know, I don't know why.
Yeah.
Maybe with everything that's happening in the movement right now.
Did you have people blow you off in the beginning? Did you have to, as we
gosh.
so often say on SheSez, step over all these no's? I'm always telling women, you're going to hear no, 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 no. All you need is one yes.
Always, always, always tested. I would get dyed whitefish and said it was hackleback, or I'd get, bowfin, and they said it was hackleback. I'm like, thank you for the dyed whitefish. Now send me some hackleback. They tested me and tested me and tested me over and over and over again. Yes, always.
Did you ever doubt yourself?
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. All the time. I knew what I was doing, but I would sit there and, I have come so close. I was in a locked limousine once with no handles, and it was set up from a client of mine. And clearly I was in a limo with the mob. And we just hoped to get to the airport. They'd be like, it's a crazy, there's so much black market in what I'm doing.
Were you
so
going to, I can't get past the story. Were you going to sell them caviar?
No, I had a meeting.
What were you doing in the limo?
And they provided a limo for me to get back to the airport.
Oh my goodness.
And then when they stopped, we realized I was with a coworker and who started the company with me, and I looked at each other like, there are no handles on these doors. We cannot get out of this.
Oh, that's frightening.
It was very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got lots of those stories.
The thing that I find so interesting about your story, I find it interesting on many levels, but it is such a perfect example of you dabbling in these various careers. And you would have never guessed when you were a neonatal nurse that you would have wound up running and owning a caviar company. And yet, everything you did led you to that. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, if you really look at the compilation of your high-end publishing and dealing with all these high-end luxury goods and your scientific, you were a nurse. There's some science in that. I mean, you learned.
No, I loved it. Yeah.
And the whole egg thing. I mean, all those things in many ways.
It really does.
Were the perfect background for you to run a caviar producing farm.
You're absolutely right. And I didn't think of that until you step back. And I said, Janet, look at how that all falls into place. And yet, while you're going down that path, you think you're going left, you're going right, you're going left. But you almost have to trust that because at the end, it all comes together and maybe, we can see how it all
When I asked you about why you were the only woman, starting a caviar company in the year 2007, you said that the seafood industry is a very male-dominated industry. Has that changed? Are you seeing more women?
No. No. Caviar, yes, a little bit. There are a lot more women scientists and marine biologists that are coming into it as the experts. So you see it on that level, but not owning seafood. Seafood businesses are tough, and they're dirty, and they're early hours, and dealing with all the fishermen, and it's tough. It's a tough industry, and very few women are in it. There's a few, and they're real ballers. But there's not a lot of them. You can count them on one hand.
I would imagine, and I'm virtually certain that you put in a long hours and you work very, very hard. But I have to say that I think having a caviar business would be fun.
It is, yes.
You know, because
Yes.
it's a delicacy, and you're going to like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to like gourmet foods to the 5-star restaurants. You go up to Napa. Like, is it in French Laundry and all the? Of course it is.
I sold to Thomas for years.
Is that fun? Tell me about it.
It is. And what's really fascinating about caviar in what I do, because of the farming aspect, you go from the grit and the down and dirty you're in the tanks with the fish, you're doing biopsies, you're tasting caviar out of live fish. There's a lot of grit to it, and then you have a lot of glamour. So you've got, we do the Concours d'Elegance every year. We do the Chevalier de Testament seminars, and you are on private jets and yachts. I've done the Oscars, I've done the Grammys. So you have a lot of grit and glamour, and you are exposed to a lot of amazing people and a lot of amazing events. So it can be very exciting.
So, for
But you always have
example,
to look at.
so for example, the Grammys were last night. Did you do anything with that?
No, I was
Were you
here.
running around
No.
like giving
No.
Bruno Mars bumps?
Yeah, a little in the green room, right? Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun. No, I haven't. I've done the Golden Globes and the Oscars. I haven't done the Grammys yet.
In reading about you, we had a conversation on the phone, and after that, I, was reading a lot about you, and really thought that I learned so much about caviar. I mean, I was always trying to figure out what the difference between caviar and roe was.
Right.
So roe is the egg of the sturgeon, and the caviar is actually when the roe is salt cured, right?
Well, caviar comes from sturgeon.
Okay.
So it's a little bit like champagne coming from France. Otherwise, it's sparkling wine. So all caviar is roe, which is a fish egg, but caviar comes from sturgeon.
Okay.
And it has to come from a sturgeon in order for it to be called caviar. Any eggs that come from fish, which are scales, rather than a fin fish, which is sturgeon, everything else is called a roe. So essentially, all fish eggs are roes. Caviar can only be deemed caviar from a sturgeon.
So how come caviar is different colors? Like we were just in Cabo, and I saw red caviar dotting an oyster that they served me, and most often it's black.
Right.
And reading your website, you have white caviar. How does that happen?
Albino caviar. Well, it depends. So the roes will come in different colors. Essentially in Russia, they'll call it red caviar versus black caviar. And red caviar really means it comes from a fish. So it can be salmon roe, trout roe. Salmon roe can be really pink and almost red. Trout roe is orange and really vibrant colors. Whitefish roe, which has a really nice big snap, and that comes from whitefish, from pike, and from the Great Lakes. And so you have a lot of fish that give you roe, and then most all caviar goes from a dark black to a golden patina, depending upon the species, depending upon how you're harvested. And it's a little bit like people. There's sometimes blondes and mostly brunettes. Yeah, there's a lot of variation in the species. And so when you find a lighter egg, it's a little bit more of the holy grail, and it goes for a lot more money. It's a lot more fragile too.
So what is your most expensive caviar that you sell, and how much is it?
Oh, good question. It is so funny. This is always asked me. I always know what I'm buying it for. I don't always remember what I sell it for. But right now, our number one is the Golden Russian Osetra, which is an Asipensa Gulden study. And it's golden, just beautiful, beautiful patina. And that goes for about 200 to 250 an ounce.
And is an ounce one of those little containers like
Right.
you get at the grocery store? Okay.
Right.
I want to talk about like eating caviar. I do what my mom did, and that is I put out little white crackers and like a whipped, don't hate me,
No, I won't.
like a whipped cream cheese, and then I put caviar on the top. How do you brought some caviar.
I did.
So I want to know what the expert says, how you're supposed to eat it.
Well, here's the deal.
How do you serve it?
We are an everyday indulgence.
Get your goods out.
Get my
Come on
goods
out. So we can make everyone not wonder why I'm sitting here with a glass of pink champagne at 1:30.
Palate cleanser. So caviar, it should be an everyday indulgence. So there's no right or wrong way to eat caviar as far as I'm concerned. Everybody has their own preference. They can pair it with their reds, their stills, their beers, whatever they want. But there are certain baselines.
So let's hold these up so we can show them off. And is that about an ounce?
This is an ounce. Here's your Russian of Cedra. And this is my caviar queen.
So that's 1 ounce.
That's 1 ounce.
Okay. And that's super
and that
expensive.
Can go, the albino can go $600 an ounce for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I would imagine.
And that's $200.
Wow, I would imagine for the albino, you don't want to put that on anything, right?
You just want to eat it. That's why we eat it that way.
So let's get back to how you eat it. You think that the best way to eat caviar is off your hand.
Well,
I mean, would you actually have cocktail parties where you're putting it on people's hand and going, cheers?
It's bumps and bubbles. Yes, that's exactly how you want to eat the caviar.
Okay, I'm doing this at my next party. And if everyone looks at me weird,
no, they'll love it. They'll never go back and eat caviar differently again. And what I didn't realize that when you go in and you're inspecting the caviar and you're buying tins, and so in California, you can only raise the indigenous species, which is Anaciapensa transmontanus, which is a white sturgeon, which is right here. However, so you have to buy from other farms. And when you want to try it, 2 things kill caviar, which is air and temperature. So you would come into the side of a large tin and you would just slightly pull up a little bit.
Mike, can you see that? Yeah, there you go. That's better.
And you pull up a little bit of caviar to try it and to inspect it. And so you wouldn't double dip. We'd always put it on our hands.
And you're going to put it like right in between your thumb and your...
Right. So I kind of want to start it with the white sturgeon, but I'll start with this.
So like literally you're at a party and you're going around with the spoon and you're putting it on people's hands. Just like, I just want to be crystal clear.
And you know what's funny is that I started doing that and giving it to people and putting it on their hands. And I go, what are you doing? And they started pulling their hand back. And it had to do with the fact that what you're doing is you're warming it up. You feel how cold it is?
Yes, it's very cold.
So when you warm up caviar, you can release more oils. So if there are any off flavors, you're going to be able to taste them a little bit better. Take your spoon.
Okay.
And this is your pearl spoon that kind of doesn't leave any aftertaste or any off flavors because it's neutral.
What are you
doing? So
you
want to do is you want to look at the eggs and separate the eggs a little bit. I don't know if you can see. So you have this little separate, so you can see the eggs are even. They're nice and round.
After you serve this to the people before they're going to do their champagne, are you saying, hey?
No, they're just going to eat it. They're just going to have fun. But this is the reason why I do bumps is because you inspect the eggs, you look, you warm it up. So when I was buying, as I was purchasing, this is how I did it. And it's really for good inspection. This is how we do it all throughout the industry. Mm-hmm. But then I started serving it on people's hands and they go, this is cool, let's do it. But it's always something I've done all along for over 10 years.
Okay, so I'm going to see how you eat that before.
So now we're going to do is it's a little bit almost like a tequila shot or whatever else you want to do.
Go ahead, let me watch this.
What we're going to do is you're going to pearl the eggs and just going to roll the eggs on the top of your palate. So you're going to feel them individually and then you're going to push your tongue against the top of your palate and then let the eggs break and have the oils roll back.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so you're pressing it up against the roof of your mouth.
Right. Now I'm starting with a wild caviar. There's only 2 wild caviars that are legal on this planet, and they're on the threatened species list. So this is a fuller flavor. I was going to start you with.
So this is the wild.
Right.
And obviously, if you were tasting all these, you'd know right away which it was.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the reasons
why. You made that look pretty easy, so.
There you go. Good shot.
Wow. Very, that's pretty, not strong, but it's not mild.
Right. And so I usually end with that one because you'll taste all that minerality from the fish, which is a little bit
It's delicious, though.
Your bottom feeder.
So I love doing the bump. That's really fun. I'm going to do that at my next cocktail party. Maybe you can come and help me.
There you go.
Give me one other interesting way to serve it. What would be another way that you yourself would serve at a cocktail party?
So there's so many ways to do it. I'm a little bit of a purist, but to tell you the truth, this first one that you tried with that minerality, I love fish and chips, just potato chips and hackleback, and you just dunk it in, and you just take your potato chips and just
but gotta say, you gotta have like a little kilo of. You gotta have enough.
You need a vat. You need a vat.
That's the cocktail party for the queen of caviar.
Right.
We end every show with some takeaways for our listeners. So many women that listen in are women who are trying to think of their next move, and they're trying to, and they're in the process of crafting it.
Right.
What can we learn from your story, Deborah?
Trust your gut. And if you think you can't fly solo, think again. Flying solo was a big deal for me. Always wanted to have a partner, always wanted to do it with somebody else. You can still own it and collaborate with people, but don't be afraid to go for it.
Just want to preface that, though, by asking you, isn't flying solo just for some people? Some people do need a partner, don't you think?
Yeah, they do.
What kind of person is it that can fly solo?
Yeah, one that doesn't listen well. That would be me, as Jack Whitpen would agree with. I don't know. I guess it came down to finding a good, trusting partner. But there were no women in the caviar industry. It was just men. So it was a little different for me.
Deborah Keane, thanks so much
You're
for
welcome.
coming today, for
Thank
sharing
you
your
for having
story
me.
and your fabulous products. Really terrific. And I'm lucky that I only took 2 sips of that champagne. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you want to know what guests are coming up, you can go to our Facebook page. You can go to our Instagram page. And if you have a minute, rate us. We want to know what you think. Go to Apple Podcasts and give us a comment or two. Thanks so much.